Greetings and welcome to another R video where I'm going to make good on a promise I made a long time ago to follow up a data cleaning video with another look at how I like to clean up my data. And I want to start actually by showing you something that I always like to do in Qualtrics. So this is the data set that I'm going to be showing that I clean. And in this survey experiment, we had people listen to a 5-minute segment from a podcast. We randomly assigned them to various ones. And then at the end, we asked, in one sentence or two sentences, what was the podcast about? And almost everybody listened to a podcast about a study looking at race-informed curriculum in classrooms. And so the answer to that should have something to do with race-informed curriculum in classrooms. And you can see that the name of the question in Qualtrics that we gave it was quality check. And so I read this just to make sure that the participants in the study actually did listen to the podcast and have something at least mildly related to the podcast to say. And so a couple things before we get started, we're going to load tidyverse. If you haven't installed tidyverse yet, then you'll just do install.packages tidyverse. If you have, then you can use the library command to load it. And then we're also going to load the janitor package. So if you've never installed the janitor package, go ahead and do, install.packages and then janitor. But I've already installed janitor, so I'm just going to load it. So now I've loaded tidyverse and janitor. I already imported the data set. If you haven't imported data from Qualtrics yet, then I have a video that shows a really helpful and simple way to do it. Qualtrics data sometimes is a little bit obnoxious to get imported into R for reasons that I outline in that video, so you might want to check that out. But this data set's already imported. I named it DAT just for data. And I'm just going to run the names command. So names and then left paren DAT right paren. And that's going to give me the names of all the variables in the data set. So you can see it starts with start date, and the last variable is INC, which is the income question that I ask at the very end. And you will see that the 51st question that I ask is the quality check. So there are a lot of other things in here. One of the other variables that we're going to look at is the 9th column, which is response ID. But if we just get a table for the quality check, and we can do that just by the table command, table, and then in left paren, DAT is the name of our data set, $sign to say within the data set look for, and then we get the quality check variable. It has to be exactly as it appears in your data set. So if you didn't capitalize, don't capitalize. If you called it something else, it's whatever it's called in your data set. And if you didn't name it, then it might just be like Q5 or something like that. So make sure you know what this is called in the data set. And then close out with a right parenthesis. And if we get this, what it'll give us is every open-ended response, and there are, about 1,400 people or something in this data set, and it's going to give us all of those. So this one says, and notice it says reach max print omitted 263 entries. So I think that the maximum number of rows it prints is maybe 1,000, and there are 263 that it didn't give us, or I don't know, something like that. This one says the podcast was about laughter. The control condition in here is actually a podcast about laughter. So that's a valid response. So is this. So these two people were both in the control group. It looks like it might be arranged a little bit by condition. This one says the podcast was about issues facing the country, and the episode is about teaching racism in schools. That is correct. The podcast was about introducing racial topics to classroom and curriculum in grades K through 5. This is all correct. So it was about inequality. Fair enough, right? If we scroll up, we start getting some, there are some people who just said, oh yeah, so this is kind of correct. The laughter podcast is actually about it's not geology. That's probably a pun. It's like gelotology or something like that. Critical race theory is a response that we get often. But what I do with this actually is I open it in, see, the podcast was about critical race theory. Like, all right, fair enough. But I usually open this file in an Excel spreadsheet and I read through every open-ended response. And then I put a column next to the open-ended responses and I name it something like remove. And so I create a new variable in the Excel file and I create a column called remove. And then if I see a response that I don't like, that I think is invalid. So a lot of, this podcast was about critical race theory. That's not a very robust answer, but it's, basically correct. Sometimes it'll just say the podcast was about politics. It's like, all right, we'll accept it. Or the podcast was about society. Like, well, you can't prove it's not, right? But there are some answers that clearly indicate that they didn't listen to the podcast, and I mark those with a 1 in this new column that I've created. So again, if we look at the names in the data set, you'll see that like right in front of my quality check is that remove column that I created. So I manually created this in Excel and I named it remove. And if the answer looked reasonable at all, I didn't put anything there. But if it looked bad, then I put a 1 there. So everybody that has a 1 in the remove column is somebody that I want to get rid of. So if we use the table command, table left paren DAT, which is the name of the data set, $, and then remove to call that new column that I created, then what it'll show us is that there are 12 cases, there are 12 rows that have a value of 1 in this data set. I'm going to bring that up just a little bit. And so the reason I load the janitor package is because I prefer the TABYL table instead of the TABLE. And basically in this instance, the only difference is that the TABYL command from the janitor package will also tell you how many people don't have a value. So NA means there's no value. So that means there was 1,336 cases that I didn't give a 1. I just left blank. And those are all of the people whose response I deemed to be essentially valid. And this will also show you that's 99% of the data. In fact, only 0.008% of the data I considered to be invalid, and that was those 12 cases. So the next thing I want to do is create a version of the data set that only has these 12 cases that I want to remove. And to do that, I'm going to use the subset function in R. So I'm just going to create a new data set called DATR. So DATR is going to be a subset of the DAT data set. So DATR equals, and then subset is the command that I'm using, left paren DAT, comma, and then remove is the name of the variable that I created that either has a 1 or it's blank. And I'm going to put double equal sign and then 1 and then right parenthesis. So what this does is create a new data file called DATR from the DAT data set. And the only items that it includes in DATR are the people that I marked for removal. So if we run that, now we can look at the table for the DATR quality check. And these are all the people that I removed. So this is just the open-ended quality check responses for the people that I marked for removal. So the first one we have is the podcast was describing a certain idea. I was like, nope, we're not keeping you. The podcast was about the quality of sound. It was cut to short and clear. Nope, that's not what it was about. The podcast was about people talking about their daily lives and such. Nope. The main one is to entertain its audience. Podcast listeners might have one of several reasons to subscribe to a podcast, such as to hear updates and breakdowns of current events. Nope. A study about generations in school? No. She was interviewing a doctor, I believe, that studied physiology and was explaining stomach issue stuff. You know, that could be the Laughter podcast, but nope, not close enough. Reviewing hip hop? No way. No way. New ideas and publishing for the brand? Nope. I forgot? No. It's entertaining, then one of the cycling and startups. So these are all, a podcast is a series of spoken word audio episodes, all focusing on a particular topic of theme, like cycling or startups. So these are all the ones that I marked for deletion. And those are now the only ones in this DAT-R data subset. So now I'm going to get let's see, I probably don't need to do this, but I'm doing table DAT-R remove, comma, table DAT-R response ID. I probably just need the response ID. But this just says, okay, this person had a 1 in the remove, and this is their response ID. I bet if I just do table response ID, this will be a little bit cleaner. It looks the same. Or basically the same. So these are all of the response IDs that I want to remove. Now, a response ID is just a string of characters generated by Qualtrics to give each response a unique ID. It's not identifiable information. It's not linked to the person that did the study. It's just linked to the response. And so I can use this unique ID to identify the rows that I want to get rid of. And that's what I am doing right over here. I'm creating an object called reject, and in it, I'm creating a list. So I have reject equals C parentheses. Now, the C parentheses is how you list in R. So this is just going to allow me to store a list of something in the word reject. So I'm just creating a list of the response IDs I want to get rid of. And so you have to put the response IDs in quotation marks. So it's C parentheses quotation mark, and then I'll just copy the first response ID and then paste it in those quotation marks, and then put a comma, a new set of quotation marks, the next response ID I'll copy and paste, comma, a new set of quotation marks, the next response ID I'll copy and paste. And so I put all 12 of the response IDs that I want deleted in this list that I'm calling reject. And once I get to the 12th one, I'll close the parentheses and run it. So now I have my list of rejected response IDs. Now I'm going to filter my original data set to get rid of the rejected response IDs. And I'm going to do that by with this little command right here. So I'll walk you through this command a little bit at a time. I'm going to say dat equals dat, but I'm capitalizing the D on this new one. So the dat on the right-hand side of the equal sign is lowercase d, dat. That's the data file that we originally imported, that we're working with, that has all of the responses still inside of it. I'm saying use this to create a new data file that it has the same 3 letters, DAT, but by capitalizing the D, I'm getting a new response, a new data set. So it's a new version of the data. So dat equals dat. Now the next thing I'm going to use is a pipe. If you haven't encountered a pipe before, it's a piece of code in tidyverse that allows you to pass one command or function through another. So what I'm doing is connecting everything that follows this pipe to the data set dat. And so this is just an easier way of saying, okay, the thing I want you to do it with my dat data set. Okay, so I put the pipe there, which is the % sign, the greater than sign, and the % sign. And when you work in tidyverse, you'll see pipes all the time. And this, in order for this to work, you have to have loaded the tidyverse package, because this filter command is part of dplyr, and dplyr is part of the tidyverse. So, having said that, dat equals dat pipe, and then filter is the command that you're using. So you have to type filter, and then in parentheses, you'll put what you want the filter command to do. And the exclamation point, so I have filter left parentheses exclamation point. The exclamation point in R means not. So I'm saying I want you to filter it so that the response ID is not, so not whatever follows. And then %in% allows me to say what I want it to look in the response ID column for. And what I want it to look in the response ID column for is this list of the 12 invalid response IDs that I copied and pasted from over here. And I named that list reject. So I'm going to type the word reject here, and it's going to go through my DAT data. It's going to look in the response ID column, and it's going to look for the 12 response IDs that I have in my reject list. And it's going to filter them so that those response IDs are not included in my new data set, which is capital DAT. So I run that, and I've created my new data set that is minus those 12 response IDs. So if you look at the original lowercase DAT data set, you still see that there are 12 people who have a score of 1 in remove, and there are 1,336 people who don't have any value in that. But if we look at the table for my capital DAT data set, we'll see that I only have the 1,336 who have no values. So the 12 people who I marked as a 1 for removal aren't in the data set anymore. And if we look at so if we do n row for lowercase DAT data set, it'll show that I have 1,348, and the number of people I have in the capital D DAT data set is 1,336. So it's 12 less. It just removed the 12 that I marked for deletion. So now you might be thinking, can't I just manually delete those 12 people in the Excel file when I identify the row as being invalid? Yes, you can do that. It's a little bit more annoying to do it that way because you have to manually scroll over and highlight the row and delete it. Or I don't know, maybe there's an easier, shorter way to do it. But I actually like to do it this way because now I have a record of everybody that I deleted. I can easily look at what their response was. And so for purposes of transparency and reporting this back, I don't have to re-download the data file and figure out which people I deleted. I have a list of everybody I deleted that I'm saving in this clean bad responses tab. So I guess the other thing I would say is you could just do, if you did lowercase dat equals lowercase dat, you would replace your existing data set, not on your computer where it's saved, but just in R where you're working with it. So now the data set is much improved. I've gotten rid of all of these invalid responses, but I feel like this video might be going a little bit long, so I am going to stop this video there, and I'm going to do a follow-up video where I show you how to get rid of responses where they sped through and responses where they left a lot of things blank. So thanks for looking at this one. I will say that open-ended response, what was the podcast about, or if you have them read an article, what was it about, or any kind of open-ended response quality check, I strongly recommend. I find that I don't need to do a lot of data cleaning after I do this step because I identify most of the invalid or inattentive responses in that step. So thanks for watching. I'll link this to the next video where I show you how to get rid of people who exited out of the survey or left a whole bunch of questions blank in the next video.